World history is an exact science, but there is one country whose history is made up entirely of ambiguities. And because of that, the whole meaning changes. What country is that? Well, of course, Muscovy. Oh yes, sorry, since the 18th century, Russia. Did you know that a lot is left unsaid to Russians? Take, for example, the phrase that goes, Putin lifted Russia off its knees. But the full version of the saying is actually this. Putin lifted Russia off its knees and bent it over. See, it's these half-truths. They just lead to one embarrassment after another. Especially when it comes to Ukraine. Some citizens of the Russian Federation, those whose brains are plugged directly into the TV, when talking about Ukraine, prefer to use alternative place names such as Ukraina or Malorossia. If these people knew the true meaning of these names, they would be very surprised. Meanwhile, Russians use the name Malorossia with a patronizing smirk, putting emphasis on the prefix malo, meaning small. Yeah, clearly, a lot is being kept from Russians. But speaking quite seriously now, perhaps the moment has finally arrived for us to set the historical record straight once and for all. In the traditional language of the ancient Rus people, as well as in the modern Ukrainian tongue spoken today, the word veliki carries the specific meaning of big or grand. Throughout the long course of world history, it was a very common and widespread practice for empires to name their newly conquered or expanded territories using the formal prefix great. For example, in ancient times there existed a distinction between Little Greece, which referred to the original Hellas, and Great Greece, which encompassed the colonial lands of southern Italy and the island of Sicily. Greater Germany captured lands beyond the Oder, Great Poland, Great Moravia, Great Scythia, the great territory of New Rus, named according to the same principle. The original Kievan Rus, the metropolis, eventually began to be called Little. In other words, the territory of modern Russia is a colony of Kievan Rus. By calling Ukraine Little Russia, the citizens of Erefia essentially recognize Kiev as the original primordial Rus. That is, Russia is sort of a former colony of Ukraine. Didn't you know? Moscow is the backwater of Little Russia. It's probably no coincidence that Vladimir Vladimirovich is so furious, hating everything Ukrainian. Just like many of Russia's top managers before him, for that matter. In the pre-Petrine era, all Ukrainian cities were Ukrainian-speaking. But it was under Peter that the systematic destruction of the Ukrainian language and statehood began. This lasted for more than 200 years in the history of Russian Tsarism. They couldn't. Even now, they still can't come to terms with the existence of a freedom-loving, true and original Rus, Ukraine. History remembers the secret circular of Interior Minister Pyotr Valuev, which banned the publication of Ukrainian books. Later, this circular was formalized by Alexander II in the Amzukaz, which restricted the use and teaching of the Ukrainian language. High-ranking Russian statesmen of the 19th century even went so far as to claim that the Ukrainian, or Little Russian language, did not exist in nature. Meanwhile, in 1861, Vladimir Dal called the main work of his life the Explanatory Dictionary of the Great Russian, a dialect of the Russian language. By doing so, he indicated the fact that the language of Great Russia was a kind of Surzik, a dialect of the Russian language. The truly original Russian language, which can be considered Ukrainian, as it has preserved the full richness of the ancient language of the Rus the most. Emperor Alexander II, a well-known Ukrainophobe, could not allow himself to acknowledge such a fact. Therefore, the publication of the dictionary was suspended. However, later it was decided to resume printing, replacing the title page with a new one bearing a different name, the one we know today. Thanks to such censorship, the great Russian dialect Surzik gradually came to be called a language. The original and proof copies of the dictionary with its initial title have been classified, and almost all references to the first title have been erased from sources. However, a bibliographic work by Grigory Gennady, published in 1876, mentions Dahl's dictionary under its original title, Explanatory Dictionary of the Great Russian Dialect of the Russian Language. And indeed, it would be unscientific to call extremely diverse forms a language, the Finno-Slavic and Turco-Slavic dialects of Russia. for their foundations were not Slavic ethnic groups at all. Even a cursory glance at seemingly related languages makes it clear that one of these languages is clearly not Slavic. Russian. In general, everything around is called Slavic, so that later everything Slavic can be called Russian. Karol Čapek said this 100 years ago. Well, what about Ukraine? Contrary to Putin's illusions, there is nothing complicated or contrived here. In Ukrainian, the Russian word strana, country, is translated as kraina, krainoi. Or in ancient Rus, Ukraina referred to a separate land of a tribe. This sacred name, signifying one's native land, became forever rooted in the people's consciousness. And the word outskirts, Ukraina, as we've already established, is more fitting for Moscow. It is the backwater of Little Russia for us. Ukraine, however, was never, either semantically or in fact, any kind of outskirts of the Russian Empire, and it always aspired to complete state independence. Because of this, the use of the word Ukraine was forbidden in Tsarist Russia. And when officials realized that this word could neither be destroyed nor erased from the memory of Ukrainians, they decided to simply discredit it. And it was precisely then that not the most enlightened idle townsfolk began to apply the homonym Ukraina to the name Ukraine. Awkward, however. How could Russian townsfolk have known about the Ipatiev Chronicles, where the first mention of Ukraine appeared in 1187? The townsfolk themselves aren't even aware that they went from being Muscovites to being called Russians. Only in 1721, when they raised above their heads the tricolor of the provincial Moscow Tsar. Meanwhile, anyone interested can admire the Ukrainian state symbols depicted in Repin's painting. The Zaporozhian Cossacks write a letter to the Turkish Sultan, painted 130 years ago. These are two rolled-up Ukrainian banners, yellow, blue and black-red. Ilya Repin depicted Bandera symbols in a scene from the events of 1676. A perfect story for Life News and Channel 1, because if you look closely, you can even spot Yarosh's business card in the painting. Why not? After all, the Russian Philistines will swallow anything. If even the enlightened bourgeoisie under Peter believed they were descendants of the Rus, what can we say about people today? It was Peter's whim, after seeing the rich history and enlightened Europe, to give Muscovy at least some illusion of being a country with respectable roots. So Peter the Wise decided to call Moscow the metropolis, appropriating the history of ancient Kievan Rus for his own province. And the Muscovites believed it. But that's not the point here. The aggressive policy of Tsarism was never able to denationalize Ukrainians or dissolve them in the All-Russian Sea. Ukraine was, is, and will be. And the rulers of the Russian Federation will have to come to terms with this fact for a long time and gnash their teeth, unless, of course, Russia itself collapses in the very near future under the weight of a grandmother's private parts. Probably there isn't much time left to wait, since Novorossiya has already reached the expected and such a spectacular disaster. Moscow is the backwater of Little Russia. Show this to Putin, let him repeat history before someone twists off his grandfather's private parts.